Good morning. My name is Matthew Shinneman, and I am the Director of Lifespan Faith Development here at UUCY. It is good to be with you. The story I have to tell you this morning is called "The Answer is in Your Hands." Now, you see, a long time ago, there was a very, very wise woman. And she was so known all around the world because she never, ever got the answer to a question wrong. Now, I know that may seem impossible, but it is what happened. And there was a group of children in her village, and children being the sprite little children that they are, they decided they wanted to prove that they could make this wise old lady answer incorrectly. So they went to the wise old lady and they asked her all these questions about geography and politics and history and astronomy, but she never answered incorrectly. And the children were both amazed and frustrated because their goal had been to stump the wise old lady. Now, there was this one boy. He was not ready to give up. So he devised a plan. He told all of his friends, tomorrow, show up. I'm going to prove that this wise old lady is a fraud. So the next day, he shows up and he caught a small little songbird in his hand. And he held it behind his back, and he and all his friends went to the old lady and beckoned her out. And so out she came and said, "Yes, what can I do for you?" And the boy said, "Well, you claim to know the answer to every question." And she said, "I never claim to know the answer to everything. That would be impossible. What is it that you would like to know?" "Well," said the little boy, "I want to know what I'm holding behind my back." And the old lady paused for a moment and listened. And she could hear the faint rustling of wings in the boy's hand. And so she answered, "I believe you are holding a bird." And the boy was stunned. How could she know that he was holding a bird? But just then, he came up with a devious plan. He was going to ask her whether the bird was alive or dead. For if she answered that the bird was alive, he could just squish the bird in his hands and show it dead, and she would be wrong. Or if she said it was dead, he could just show her the living bird. He knew that this was the perfect plan to stump the wise old lady. So he asked, "Is the bird alive or dead?" And the old lady thought for a moment, took a deep breath, and answered, "The answer to that question is in your hands. It is in your hands, dear boy." And the dear boy realized that yet again the wise old lady was correct. Whether the bird would be alive or dead depended entirely on the young boy. And he took his hands out and set the bird free, and he had felt ashamed that he had even considered squishing this little bird. Now, the moral of this story, especially in this month of October when we have been focusing on relationship and covenant, is that when we are in relationship with others, whoever they may be, how we treat them is in our hands. Imagine how that bird felt, knowing that their relationship could end just as easily as it began, all based on whether the boy decided whether he wanted to be cruel or kind. in our relationships, so key to who we are as Unitarian Universalists, the answer is always in our hands. May it be so.
Today's reading is by Reverend Leslie Takahashi from the Multicultural Unitarian Universalist meditation manual called Voices from the Margins. This poem, prayer, is called Marginal Wisdom. They teach us to read in black and white. Truth is this, the rest is false. You are whole, you're broken. Who you love is acceptable or not. Life tells its truth in many hues. We are taught to think in either or, to believe the teachings of Jesus or Buddha, to believe in human potential or the power beyond a single wall. I am broken or I am powerful. Life embraces many multiple truths, speaks of both and of and. We are taught to see in absolutes, good versus evil, male versus female, old versus young, gay versus straight. Let us see the fractions, the spectrum, the margins. Let us open our hearts to the complexity of our worlds. Let us make our lives sanctuaries to nurture these many identities. The day is coming when all will know that the rainbow world is more gorgeous than the monochrome, that a river of identities can ebb and flow over the static, stubborn rocks in its course. That is the margins that hold the center, unquote.
I was 20 before I knew someone who was gay. Wait, let me make that statement more accurately. I was 20 before someone felt safe enough to tell me that they were gay. I was 20 before the social circles I moved in, the town where I lived, the general environment that I was a part of, felt like safe enough places for anyone to openly declare their homosexuality. The high school I attended in the late 1980s did not have a P-flag group or a gay-straight alliance student organization. Most of the messages I received about sexuality at that time in my life were entirely fear-based. In the faith tradition of my youth, sexuality was a gift from God that was only properly expressed between a man and a woman who had already committed to one another in marriage. And the fear came into play whenever a sexual idea or urge or interest came up in any other context. If sexuality outside of marriage was a sin, then it could in fact lead directly to long suffering or possibly eternal damnation. But even the secular messages of my youth and young adulthood were full of fear because of the AIDS pandemic that was only starting to become front page news in the mid-1980s. Sex education classes at the time in my public school focused almost entirely on the prevention of this deadly disease. And the lessons that we were taught explicitly were also underpinned with implicit lessons. Doing this in the wrong way is bad. It is immoral. It is potentially deadly. And the wrong way really meant an expansive number of ways because the definition of the right way was so narrow. None of this makes very much sense in retrospect. Both the religious and secular approaches to sexual health and well-being, to the establishment of thriving and various relationships based in joyous consent, both those approaches seem paltry, lackluster, or entirely absent. And yet that's the worldview that I adhered to until young adulthood. And change came slowly. In our reading today that Kate shared with us, did a wonderful job, Reverend Leslie Takahashi writes, "Life embraces multiple truths, speaks of both and of and. We're taught to see in absolutes, good versus evil, male versus female, old versus young, gay versus straight. Let us see the fractions, the spectrum, the margins. Let us open our hearts to the complexity of our worlds. Let us make our lives sanctuaries to nurture our many identities. Let us open our hearts to the complexity of our worlds. If we do not do so, if we close our hearts to this complexity, both within ourselves and within others, we'll lose empathy. We will lose a sense of expansive welcome. We will lose that which may make us safe enough to others that they will trust us with their true selves. Throughout the month of October, we have explored the theme of cultivating relationship with ourselves, with each other, with our past, and the past of the many other peoples who have called this land home. October is also LGBTQIA+ History Month, and every year on October 11th, we are invited to celebrate National Coming Out Day. And yes, that was a little while ago, but it's still a marvelous way to consider the way that we grow relationships in our own lives and how those relationships can keep our hearts open, keep us learning, keep us curious about everyone we meet. National Coming Out Day was officially established in 1988 by activists Robert Eichberg and Jean O'Leary. They felt that increased visibility was vital for the queer community to survive and ultimately to thrive, a viewpoint upheld by many of their predecessors and ancestors within the movement for LGBTQIA+ rights. They chose the 11th of October to honor the date of the 1987 National March on Washington for lesbian and gay rights. Robert Eichberg, speaking later in 1993, said, "Most people think they don't know anyone gay or lesbian, and in fact, everybody does. It is imperative that we come out and let people know who we are and disabuse them of their fears and stereotypes." Fears and stereotypes. That's exactly the sort of baggage that I was lugging around for years myself. And then when my friend came out to me when I was 20, I felt so honored. But as I noted, change in my life from the narrow viewpoints of sexuality and human relationships that I had been taught, that change came slowly. And it was only as more and more people honored the intention of National Coming Out Day that I was able to think about my past attitudes and behaviors and see how misguided and often outright wrong they were. My friend came out to me when we were both in college. It was a time of rapid change, and being in a college campus environment magnified that. More people came out, and I also met more people who had been out for a long time. And so the easiest part for me to consider and to change were the secular, the societal messages that I had absorbed about sexuality and many varieties of human relationships. But the faith-based messages I had taken in about the sinful nature of sex outside of marriage and any other type of sexual activity not between a married heterosexual couple, those were stickier. They were harder to dislodge and examine. When I left the Catholic Church of my childhood, I rejected those ideas as far too narrow, but what about my ingrained sense of morality and of what was right? I didn't have any knowledge of or perspective on faith traditions that had other more accepting and welcoming messages about sexuality and human relationships. In 2011, I volunteered with a group called Marylanders for Marriage Equality, doing phone banks and canvassing to support that proposed law in the town where I lived at the time, Columbia, Maryland. One evening, we did phone bank calls from a room in the Owen Brown Interfaith Center, which happens to be where the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Columbia meets, my home congregation. I saw their signs and their pamphlets, and I was curious and very interested. I went home and Googled Unitarian Universalism, and I was ordained in that sanctuary last week. The rest is history. Right? But the most important part of that history that I must not forget and that I ask for us all to search for today in our own pasts, was finding something not just to remove my old faith-based bigotry, but to replace it with an affirming theology uplifting the worth, dignity, beauty, autonomy, and grace of every person. A faith tradition where people are encouraged to love who they love, to continually seek joyous consent for physical, emotional, and spiritual intimacy, and where affirming values-based sexuality education is offered across the whole span of human life. This community, I mean. So I invite you today to look back and to think about the ways your attitudes and beliefs have changed over time. Think about how the world has changed, the town you live in, the society you are a part of. What is your history of learning about someone whose experiences you might not understand at first? How has your empathy grown? How have you opened your hearts to the complexity of our worlds? There's a frame I'd like to share with you today that helps me to focus on growing my empathy, keeping me curious, and keeping my heart open. I learned it in seminary, but not as a direct part of any course classwork. I learned it from my friend Nina, who is a Hawaiian cultural practitioner, and she shared this lesson from that culture. This is how we heal the world. The 3 R's: reach, relationship, responsibility. She explained it this way. The first things, the easiest things for us to learn about and to know are those which are closest to us, physically closest. The first people we come to know are our caregivers, those who take care of our infant selves when we cannot. The first animals we come to know are perhaps family pets, the birds we see outside our window each day, the rabbits we see in the community garden, and the fish we see swimming in the nearby lake. The first land we know is the dirt of our hometown, the grit underneath the playground equipment, the root cellar where we store our vegetables. Once we see these things, we begin to build those relationships. If I see that bird outside my window every day, I might feel called to talk to the bird or research what kind of bird it is. I might even put out a bird feeder. And if I put out a bird feeder for that bird, why, I am taking some kind of responsibility for its well-being, right? If I see that bird lying injured below the feeder, I will absolutely do everything I can to help that bird. And what about the bird in our story today that Matt shared with us? The bird that the boy caught to try to test the wisdom of the old woman living at the outskirts of his village. Arguably, when he caught that bird, it was quite literally within reach. But of course, he wasn't looking at it as a bird. He was looking at it as a means to an end, proving the wise woman wasn't as wise as she seemed. But the woman heard the tiny sounds of the bird's ruffling feathers as the boy held it behind his back. From the story, we learned that she could figure out when rains were coming and had helped neighbors make their way through an argument. This woman knew the world around her very deeply. She knew how to pay attention to all that was close to her, to be in relationship with it, and to cultivate responsibility in reaction to that relationship. When the boy, angry that she was right about the bird, asked her to say if the bird was alive or dead, the woman said, "The answer is in your hands." And the boy paid a new kind of attention to the small life he held. He could not kill it. Her observation drew him closer to the truth of that small bird's life. A relationship now existed that was a bird, not a means to an end, and he was responsible for whether it lived or died. From our reading this morning, let us make our lives sanctuaries to nurture our many identities. Of course, each person is more than their sexual preference, their affectional preference, their gender identity, their choice of gender expression. Each person, each one of us, is layer upon layer of truth. And these truths are not carved permanently in stone either. We each have the capacity to grow in our own self-knowledge, to change our relationship with ourselves, to be aware of the kind of changes we are undergoing. I've often wondered what it was that made that first friend feel safe coming out to me. Clearly, I had not yet shed myself of the fear and stereotypes that I carried. What in me made him feel safe, trusting me with that knowledge, even before he was out to many other friends? I can't speak for him, of course, and I didn't have time to check in with him earlier this week. I should have asked. But I think it was the way we heal the world. Reach, relationship, responsibility. We knew each other, and we grew into liking each other, which grew into caring for each other and taking responsibility. There are many more identities that we each have, and we likely all have fears and stereotypes we are still carrying, even as we strive to learn more and to do better. And the 3 R's invite us into a frame of expansive curiosity that will serve us every time we meet someone who contains different truths, different identities from ourselves, which is basically everyone, right? My perspective today is my own, and my own understanding of how I exist and show up in the world of human relationships has shifted quite a lot since the day that my friend came out to me. But each of us listening today knows someone, perhaps several someones, for whom it is hard for us to summon empathy. Maybe you find yourself rushing to judgment. Sometimes, so do I. Remember that we begin with those things and beings closest to ourselves, including ourselves. Get curious about where that judgment comes from. What are we each carrying or struggling with? We can't know. National Coming Out Day is a reminder, even to people who do not yet feel comfortable coming out or safe coming out, or to people who are out to some people and not to others, or to people who came out of the closet only to find life circumstances forcing them back into it. This reminds us that we rarely know all of the people we know. We rarely know the entirety of another person. But if we stay in open, honest, caring relationships with them, the kind that grows when we pay attention to that which is within our reach, then we might make more room in our hearts for complexity. We may feel the lightness that comes from shedding those fears and stereotypes. We may feel the truth deeply behind the words, "Love is love," and "all of who you are is welcome here."
Good morning. We're so pleased to play in the service today, and we're so pleased to play this song. This is a song written by singer-songwriter Vienna Ting. She wrote it in honor of her hometown of San Francisco, the first city in the United States to legalize gay marriage and perform those ceremonies. The first ceremonies were performed in February of 2004 under the auspices of then Mayor of San Francisco, Gavin Newsom, now the Governor of California. One, two, three, four. Me and my baby on a February holiday, 'cause we got the news. Yeah, we got the news. baby been through a lot of good and bad. Learned to kiss the sky, made her mamas cry. And a lot of friends after giving it all they had laid down and died, laid down and died. 10 years into it, here's our window at the Vegas drive-through chapel. It ain't too much for 'em all to handle. Oh, 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 me and my baby dropping down to a hilly seaside town in the rainfall. Oh, 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 me and my baby stand in line. You never seen a sight so fine as the love that's gonna shine at City Hall. Outside, they're handing out donuts and pizza pie for the folks in pairs in the folding chairs. My baby's looking so damn pretty with those anxious eyes, rain-speckled hair, my ring to wear. 10 years waiting for this moment of fate when we say the words and sign our names. If they take it away again someday, this beautiful thing won't change. And oh, 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 me and my baby dropping down to a hilly seaside town in the rainfall. Oh, 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 me and my baby stand in line. You never seen a sight so fine as the love that's gonna shine. Oh, 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 me and my baby dropping down to a hilly seaside town in the rainfall. Oh, 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 me and my baby stand in line. You never seen a sight so fine as the love that's gonna shine at City Hall.
Yahoo! Now is the time for us to extinguish the chalice. And please join with me at home in saying these words. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
As you leave this place, may it guide your way until we are together again.
We have had beautiful offerings, gifts of words, of song, of silence. Take and cherish all of these in your heart and remember that the flame of our faith goes with us. It is an interior fire to light and to heat us, to stir us to action when we see injustice, and to comfort us when we feel lost and alone. So may it be.
Playing bluegrass under the rainbow flag of pride and working to make this musical community more inclusive and more welcoming.